Chapter 3. Listening. It had been a long week. It had been a long day at the office. By the time Jason Whitehawk pulled his late model car into the driveway at home, he was exhausted. As he trudged into the house, he routinely asked his wife, "How did things go with you at work today?" "Oh, pretty well," she replied, "except for the terrorist attack in the morning and the outbreak of the bubonic plague in the afternoon." Jason nodded his head as he made his way to the sofa. "That's nice. At least someone had a good day." This story illustrates what one research study after another has revealed. Most people are shockingly poor listeners. We fake paying attention. We can look right at someone, appear interested in what the person says, even nod our head or smile at the appropriate moments, all without really listening. Not listening doesn't mean we don't hear. Hearing is a physiological process involving the vibration of sound waves on our eardrums and the firing of electrochemical impulses from the inner ear to the central auditory system of the brain. But listening involves paying close attention to and making sense of what we hear. Even when we think we are listening carefully, we usually grasp only 50% of what we hear. After 24 hours, we can remember only 10% of the original message. It's little wonder that listening has been called a lost art. Listening is important. Although most people listen poorly, there are exceptions. Top-flight business executives, successful politicians, brilliant teachers, nearly all are excellent listeners. So much of what they have to do depends on absorbing information that is given verbally and absorbing it quickly and accurately. If you had an interview with the president of a major corporation, you might be shocked and flattered to see how closely that person listened to your words. In our communication-oriented age, listening is more important than ever. According to one study, more than 60% of errors made in business come from poor listening. Replacing poor listening with good listening improves efficiency, sales, customer satisfaction, and employee morale. This is why in most companies, effective listeners hold higher positions and are promoted more often than ineffective listeners. When business managers are asked to rank order the communication skills most crucial to their jobs, they usually rank listening as number one. Even if you don't plan to be a corporate executive, the art of listening can be helpful in almost every part of your life. This is not surprising when you realize that people spend more time listening than in any other communicative activity. More than reading, more than writing, more than even speaking. Think for a moment about your own life as a college student. Most class time in U.S. colleges and universities is spent listening to discussions and lectures. A number of studies have shown a strong correlation between listening and academic success. Students with the highest grades are usually those with the strongest listening skills. The reverse is also true. Students with the lowest grades are usually those with the weakest listening skills. There is plenty of reason then to take listening seriously. Employers and employees, parents and children, wives and husbands, doctors and patients, students and teachers, all depend on the apparently simple skill of listening. Regardless of your profession or walk of life, you never escape the need for a well-trained ear. Listening is also important to you as a speaker. It is probably the way you get most of your ideas and information from television, radio, conversation, and lectures. If you do not listen well, you will not understand what you hear and may pass along your misunderstanding to others. Besides, in class, as in life, you will listen to many more speeches than you give. It is only fair to pay close attention to your classmates' speeches. After all, you want them to listen carefully to your speeches. An excellent way to improve your own speeches is to listen attentively to the speeches of other people. Over and over, teachers find that the best speakers are usually the best listeners. A side benefit of your speech class is that it offers an ideal opportunity to work on the art of listening. During the 95% of the time when you are not speaking, you have nothing else to do but listen and learn. You can sit there like a stone, or you can use the time profitably to master a skill that will serve you in 1,000 ways. Listening and critical thinking. One of the ways listening can serve you is by enhancing your skills as a critical thinker. We can identify 4 kinds of listening. Appreciative listening. Listening for pleasure or enjoyment, as when we listen to music, to a comedy routine, or an entertaining speech. Empathetic listening. Listening to provide emotional support for the speaker, as when a psychiatrist listens to a patient or when we lend a sympathetic ear to a friend in distress. Comprehensive listening. Listening to understand the message of a speaker, as when we attend a classroom, lecture, or listen to directions for finding a friend's house. Critical listening. Listening to evaluate a message for purposes of accepting or rejecting it, as when we listen to the sales pitch of a car salesperson or the campaign speech of a political candidate. Although all 4 kinds of listening are important, this chapter deals primarily with comprehensive listening and critical listening. They are the kinds of listening you will use most often when listening to speeches in class, when taking lecture notes in other courses, when communicating at work, and when responding to the barrage of commercials, political messages, and other persuasive appeals you face every day. There are also the kinds of listening that are most closely tied to critical thinking. As we saw in Chapter 1, critical thinking involves a number of skills. Some of those skills, summarizing information, recalling facts, distinguishing main points from minor points, are central to comprehensive listening. Other skills of critical thinking, separating fact from opinion, spotting on weakness in reasoning, judging the soundness of evidence, are especially important in critical listening. When you engage in comprehensive listening or critical listening, you must use your mind as well as your ears. When your mind is not actively involved, you may be hearing, but you are not listening. In fact, listening and critical thinking are so closely allied that training in listening is also training how to think. At the end of this chapter, we will discuss steps you can take to improve your skills in comprehensive and critical listening. If you follow these steps, you may also become a better critical thinker. 4 causes of poor listening. Not concentrating. The brain is incredibly efficient. Although we talk at a rate of 120 to 150 words per minute, the brain can process 400 to 800 words a minute. This would seem to make listening very easy, but actually it has the opposite effect. Because we can process the speaker's words and still have plenty of spare brain time, we are tempted to interrupt our listening by thinking about other things. Here's what happens. Elena Kim works in the public communications department of a large insurance company. She attends regular staff meetings with the communications director. The meetings provide necessary information, but sometimes they seem to drag on forever. This morning, the director is talking about the company's new executive vice president, who has just moved to headquarters from a regional firm in Florida. Mr. Fernandez has never worked in a company this size, but his experience in Florida, Elena dreams, sun, endless beaches, and the club scene in South Beach. Maybe I can snatch a few days vacation in January. Sternly, Elena pulls her attention back to the meeting. The communications director is now discussing the company's latest plans for public service announcements. Elena is not involved in the plan, and her attention wanders once more. That morning, she had another argument with her roommate about cleaning the kitchen and taking out the garbage. Maybe it's time to decide if she can afford to live without a roommate. It sure would make for fewer hassles. An area Elena has researched extensively. The director is saying, "Uh-oh, What area does the director mean? Everyone looks at Elena as she frantically tries to recall the last words said at the meeting. It's not that Elena meant to lose track of the discussion, but there comes a point at which it's so easy to let your thoughts wander rather than concentrate on what's being said. After all, concentrating is hard work. Louis Nizer, the famous trial lawyer, says, so complete this concentration that at the end of a court date in which I have only listened, I find myself wringing wet despite a calm and casual manner. Later in this chapter, we will look at some things you can do to concentrate better on what you hear. Listening too hard. Until now, we have been talking about not paying close attention to what we hear. But sometimes we listen too hard. We turn into human sponges, soaking up a speaker's every word as if every word were equally important. We try to remember all the names, all the dates, all the places. In the process, we often miss the speaker's main point. What is worse, we may end up confusing the facts as well. Shortly after graduating from college, Carlos Molina landed an excellent job as a web developer, knowing he had never been good at budgeting his money. He signed up for a financial planning workshop. The first session was about retirement planning. Simone Fisher, who was conducting the workshop, explained that 7 in 10 Americans between the ages of 22 and 35 do not have a monthly budget or savings plan. Carlos wrote down every number Simone mentioned. To have a retirement income equal to 75% of your current salary, Simone continued, you will need to invest at least 6% of your present earnings. You also need to account for inflation over time. This afternoon, we will meet with each of you personally to calculate your individual savings needs. In the meantime, I want to stress that the most important thing is to start saving now. Carlos zealously typed each statistic into his laptop. When Simone opened the floor for questions, Carlos raised his hand and said, I have 2 questions. When should I start saving for retirement? And how do I figure out how to account for future inflation? This is a typical example of losing a speaker's point by concentrating on details. Carlos had fixed his mind on remembering all the statistics in Simone's presentation, but he blocked out the main message, that it's best to start saving now and that he would get help in developing an individual plan. Rather than trying to remember everything a speaker says, efficient listening usually concentrates on main points and evidence. We discuss these things more thoroughly in the chapter. Jumping to conclusions. Kia Lee, a recent college graduate, took a job as an editorial assistant in the research department of the regional magazine. Shortly after Kia arrived, the editor in charge of the research department left the magazine for another job. For the next 2 months, Kia struggled to handle the work of the research department by herself. She often felt in over her head, but she knew this was a good opportunity to learn, and she hated to give up her new responsibilities. One day, Derek Perkins, the editor-in-chief of the magazine, comes into Kia's office to talk. The following conversation takes place. Derek: You've done a great job these last 2 months, Kia, but you know we really need a new editor, so we've decided to make some changes. Kia: I'm not surprised. I know I've made my share of mistakes. Derek: Everyone makes mistakes when they're starting out, and you've been carrying a lot of responsibility. That's why. Kia: I know I'm inexperienced, and this is an important department. Derek: Yes, it is, and it's not an easy job. We really need an editor and an assistant to handle all the work. That's why I wanted to tell you. Kia: I understand. I knew all along that I was just filling in. Derek: Kia, you're not listening. Kia: Yes, I am. You're trying to be nice, but you're here to tell me that you've hired a new editor, and I'll be going back to my old job. Derek: No, that's not it at all. I think you've done a fine job under difficult circumstances. You've proved yourself, and I intend to make you the editor. But I think you'll need an assistant to help you. Why is there so much confusion here? Kia clearly is unsure about her future at the magazine. So when Derek starts to talk about making some changes, Kia jumps to a conclusion and assumes the worst. Misunderstanding could have been avoided if, when Derek had said, "We've decided to make some changes," Kia had asked what changes and then listened. This is one form of jumping to conclusions, putting words into a speaker's mouth. It is one reason why we sometimes communicate so poorly with people we are closest to, because we are so sure we know what they mean. We don't listen to what they actually say. Another way of jumping to conclusions is prematurely rejecting a speaker's ideas as boring or misguided. That would be a mistake. Let's say the announced topic is architecture and history. It sounds dull, so you tune it out and miss a fascinating discussion filled with human interest stories about buildings and other structures from the ancient pyramids to the latest skyscrapers. Nearly every speech has something to offer you, whether it be information, point of view, or technique. You're cheating yourself if you prejudge and choose not to listen. Focusing on delivery and personal appearance. Avid readers of American history, Greg and Marissa, were thrilled when they saw a poster at their local bookstore advertising a lecture by the author of a new book on the Battle of Gettysburg. The book had received good reviews, and Greg and Marissa made plans to attend the lecture. Arriving at the bookstore, they took their seats and listened while the speaker discussed his research and major findings. "That was great," Marissa exclaimed when they got back to the car, but Greg was scowling. "What's wrong?" Marissa asked. "I know you're going to think this is stupid," Greg began. "The guy was a decent speaker and he seemed to know his stuff. But did you see the sport coat he was wearing? It's so retro, and his tie was atrocious. No matter how much I tried, I kept thinking he hadn't gone shopping since the 1980s. This story illustrates a common problem. Sometimes we judge people by the way they look or speak and don't listen to what they say. It's easy to become distracted by a speaker's accent, personal experience, or personal appearance, or vocal mannerisms, and lose sight of the message. Focusing on a speaker's delivery or personal appearance is one of the major sources of interference in the speech communication process, and it is something we always need to guard against. How to become a better listener. Take listening seriously. The first step toward becoming a better listener is to accord listening to the seriousness it deserves. Good listeners are not born that way. They have worked at learning how to listen effectively. Good listening does not go hand in hand with intelligence, education, or social standing. Like any other skill, it comes from patience and self-discipline. Check your current skills as a listener by completing the listening self-evaluation worksheet on page 54. Once you have identified your shortcomings as a listener, make a serious effort to overcome them. Be an active listener. So many aspects of modern life encourage us to listen passively. We listen to our iPods while studying. Parents listen to their children while fixing dinner. Television reporters listen to a politician's speech while walking around the auditorium looking for their next interview. This is a type of passive listening. This type of passive listening is a habit, but so is active listening. Active listeners give their undivided attention to the speaker in a genuine effort to understand his or her point of view. In this conversation, they do not interrupt the speaker or finish his or her sentences. When listening to a speech, they do not allow themselves to be distracted by internal or external interference, and they do not prejudge the speaker. They take listening seriously and do the best they can to stay focused on the speaker and his or her message. There are a number of steps you can take to improve your skills of active listening. They include restricting distractions, not allowing yourself to be diverted by a speaker's appearance or delivery, suspending judgment until you have heard the speaker out, focusing on your listening and developing note-taking skills. We'll discuss each of these in turn. Resisting distractions. In an ideal world, we would eliminate all physical and mental distractions. In the real world, however, we cannot. Because we think so much faster than a speaker can talk, it's easy to let our attention wander. Sometimes it's very easy when the room is too hot, when construction machinery is operating right outside the window, when the speaker is tedious. But our attention can stray even in the best of circumstances, if for no other reason than a failure to stay alert and make ourselves concentrate. Whenever you find this happening, make a conscious effort to pull your mind back to what the speaker is saying, then force it to stay there. One way to do this is to think ahead of the speaker. Try to anticipate what will come next. This is not the same as jumping to conclusions. When you jump to conclusions, you put words into the speaker's mouth and don't listen to what is said. In this case, you will listen and measure what the speaker says against what you had anticipated. Another way to keep your mind on a speech is to review mentally what the speaker has already said and make sure you understand it. Yet another is to listen between the lines and assess what the speaker implies verbally or says non-verbally with body language. Suppose the speaker is introducing someone to an audience. The speaker says, "It gives me great pleasure to present to you my very dear friend Ashley Hauser." But the speaker doesn't shake hands with Ashley. He doesn't even look at her, just turns his back and leaves the podium. Is Ashley really his dear friend? Certainly not. Attentive listeners can pick up on all kinds of clues to a speaker's real message. At first, you may find it difficult to listen so intently. If you work at it, however, your concentration is bound to improve. Don't be diverted by appearance or delivery. If you had attended Abraham Lincoln's momentous Cooper Union speech of 1860, this is what you would have seen. The long, ungainly figure upon which hung clothes that while new for this trip were evidently the work of an unskilled tailor, the large feet and clumsy hands of which, at the outset at least, the orator seemed to be duly conscious. The long, gaunt head, capped by a shock of hair that seemed not to have been thoroughly brushed out, made a picture which did not fit in with New York's conception of a finished statesman. But although he seemed awkward and uncultivated, Lincoln had a powerful message behind the moral evils of slavery. Fortunately, the audience at Cooper Union did not let his appearance stand in the way of his words. Similarly, you must be willing to set aside preconceived judgments based on a person's looks or manner of speech. Gandhi was an unimpressive-looking man who often spoke dressed in a simple white cotton cloth. Renowned physicist Stephen Hawking is severely disabled and can speak only with the aid of a voice synthesizer. Yet imagine how much poorer the world would be if no one listened to him. Even though it may tax your tolerance, patience, and concentration, don't let negative feelings about a speaker's appearance or delivery keep you from listening to the message. On the other hand, try not to be misled if the speaker has unusually attractive appearance. It is all too easy to assume that because someone is good-looking and has a polished delivery, he or she is speaking eloquently. Some of the most unscrupulous speakers in history have been handsome people with hypnotic delivery skills. Again, be sure you respond to the message, not the package it comes in. Suspend judgment. Unless we listened only to people who think exactly as we do, we are going to hear things with which we disagree. When this happens, our natural inclination is to argue mentally with the speaker or to dismiss everything he or she has to say. But neither response is fair, and in both cases we blot out any chance of learning or being persuaded. Does this mean you must agree with everything you hear? Not at all. It means you should hear people out before reaching a final judgment. Try to understand their point of view. Listen to their ideas, examine their evidence, assess their reasoning, then make up your mind. The aim of active listening is set to aside one's own prejudices, frames of reference, and desires so as to experience as far as possible the speaker's world from the inside. It has been said more than once that a closed mind is an empty mind. Focus your listening. As we have seen, skilled listeners do not try to absorb a speaker's every word. Rather, they focus on specific things in a speech. Here are 3 suggestions to help you focus your listening. Listen for main points. Most speeches contain from 2 or 4 main points. Here, for example, are the main points of a recent speech by Jack Hayes, Director of the U.S. National Weather Service. 1. The past 50 years have witnessed a number of pioneering innovations in meteorology. 2. Today, meteorologists can provide better weather warnings than at any time in history. 3. Future advances in meteorology will require visionary ideas and economic resources. These 3 main points are at the heart of Hayes' message. As with any speech, they are the most important things to listen for. Unless the speaker is terribly scatterbrained, you should be able to detect his or her main points with little difficulty. Often a speaker will give some idea at the outset of the main points to be discussed in the speech. For example, at the end of his introduction, Hayes said he was going to reflect on where we were, where we are, and where we go from here. As the speech progressed, Hayes moved from point to point, which signposts such as, "Let's take a brief look at how far we've come," and "What's on the horizon for us?" After this, the only most inattentive of listeners could have missed his main points. Listen for evidence. Identifying a speaker's main points, however, is not enough. You must also listen for supporting evidence. By themselves, Hayes' main points are only assertions. You may be inclined to believe them just because they come from an important meteorologist. Yet a careful listener will be concerned about evidence no matter who is speaking. Had you been listening to Hayes' speech, you would have heard him support his claims with a mass of verifiable evidence. Here is an excerpt. Over the past 20 years, advances in science and technology have enabled us to increase public preparation for flash floods from 10 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes to a 7-fold improvement. We've improved accuracy in hurricane track forecasting. In 1970, 48-hour track error was about 250 nautical miles. In 2009, it was less than 100 nautical miles. In fact, our current average of error at 96 hours is better than our 48-hour forecast was in 1970, giving coastal residents and businesses 2 more days to prepare for the likes of a hurricane. There are 4 basic questions to ask about a speaker's evidence. Is it accurate? Is it taken from objective sources? Is it relevant to the speaker's claims? Is it sufficient to support the speaker's point? In Hayes' case, the answer to each question is yes. He figures about meteorological advances are well established in the public record and can be verified by independent sources. The figures are clearly relevant to Hayes' claim that improvements in meteorology are saving lives and money, and they are sufficient to support that claim. If Hayes' evidence were inaccurate, biased, irrelevant, or insufficient, you should be wary of accepting his claim. We shall discuss these and other tests of evidence in detail, chapters 8 and 17. For now, that's enough to know that you should be on guard against unfounded assertions and sweeping generalizations. Keep an eye out for the speaker's evidence and for its accuracy, objectivity, relevance, and sufficiency. Listen for technique. We said earlier that you should not let a speaker's delivery distract you from the message, and this is true. However, if you want to become an effective speaker, you should study the methods other people use to speak effectively. Analyze the introduction. What methods does the speaker use to gain attention and relate to the audience? To establish credibility and goodwill, assess the organization of the speech. Is it clear and easy to follow? Can you pick out the speaker's main points? Can you follow when the speaker moves from one point to another? Study the speaker's language. Is it accurate, clear, vivid, appropriate? Does the speaker adapt well to the audience and occasion? Finally, diagnose the speaker's delivery. Is it fluent, dynamic, convincing? Does it strengthen or weaken the impact of the speaker's ideas? How well does the speaker use eye contact, gestures, and visual aids? As you listen, focus on the speaker's strengths and weaknesses. If the speaker is not effective, try to determine why. If he or she is effective, try to pick out techniques that you can use in your own speeches. If you listen in this way, you will be surprised by how much you can learn about successful speaking. Develop note-taking skills. Speech students are often amazed at how easily their teacher can pick out a speaker's main points, evidence, and techniques. Of course, the teacher knows what to listen for and has had plenty of practice. But by the time you get an opportunity, watch your teacher during a speech. But the next time you get an opportunity, watch your teacher during a speech. Chances are he or she will be listening with a laptop or pen and paper. When note-taking is done properly, it is a surefire way to improve your concentration and keep track of the speaker's ideas. The key words here are when done properly. Unfortunately, many people don't take notes effectively. Some try to take down everything a speaker says. They view the enterprise as a race that pits their note-taking speed against the speaker's rate of speed. As the speaker starts to talk, the note-taker starts to write or type. But soon the speaker is winning the race. In a desperate effort to keep up, the note-taker tries to go faster and faster. But even this is not enough. The speaker pulls so far ahead that the note-taker can never catch up. Some people go to the opposite extreme. They arrive armed with a pen and laptop and the best of intentions. They know they can't write everything down, so they wait for the speaker to say something that grabs their attention. Every once in a while, the speaker rewards them with a joke, a dramatic story, or startling fact. Then the note-taker records a few words and leans back to await the next fascinating tidbit. By the end of the lecture, the note-taker has a set of tidbits and little or no record of the speaker's important ideas. As these examples illustrate the most inefficient note-takers, most inefficient note-takers suffer from one or both of the two problems. They do not know what to listen for, and they don't know how to record what they do listen for. The solution to the first problem is focus on the speaker's main points and evidence. But once you know what to listen for, you still need a sound method of note-taking. Although there are a number of systems, most students find the keyword outline best for listening to classroom lectures and formal speeches. As its name suggests, this method briefly notes a speaker's main points and supporting evidence in rough outline form. Suppose a speaker says, "Hospitals in the United States are facing a serious shortage of nurses. According to the American Hospital Association, the nurse shortage worldwide has reached an alarming total of 135,000. What's worse, a recent article in Health Affairs projects that the shortage will reach 260 by 2025. Hospitals in major cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Miami have had to reduce services because of lack of nurses. There are 4 major causes for the shortage of nurses. One cause is that there are not enough faculty members at nursing schools to train the number of nurses needed by hospitals. A second cause is that nurses can find employment at medical facilities other than hospitals. A third cause is that many nurses are reluctant to stay on the job because of poor working hours that includes nights, holidays, and weekends. A fourth cause is that nurses are burdened with excessive paperwork. A keyword note taker would record something like this: serious nurse shortage, total of 135,000, 260,000 by 2025. Reduced services at hospitals. 4 major causes: low faculty at nursing schools, employment available beyond hospitals, poor working hours, excessive paperwork. Notice how brief the notes are, yet they accurately summarize the speaker's ideas. They are also very clear by separating the main points from the subpoints and evidence. The outline format shows the relationships between the speaker's ideas. Perfecting this or any other system of note-taking requires practice, but with little effort, you should see results soon. As you become a better note-taker, you will become a better listener. This is also a good chance that you will become a better student. Research confirms that students who take effective notes usually receive higher grades than those who do not. Summary. Most people are poor listeners, even when we think we are listening carefully. We usually grasp only half of what we hear, and we retain even less. Improving your listening skills can be helpful in every part of your life, including speech making. The most important cause of poor listening is giving into distractions and letting our thoughts wander. Sometimes, however, we listen too hard. We try to remember every word the speaker says, and we lose the main message by concentrating on details. In other situations, we may jump to conclusions and prejudge a speaker without hearing out the message. Finally, we often judge people by their appearance or speaking manner instead of listening to what they say. You can overcome these poor listening habits by taking several steps. First, take listening seriously and commit yourself to becoming a better listener. Second, work at being an active listener. Give your undivided attention to the speaker in a genuine effort to understand his or her ideas. Third, resist distractions. Make a conscious effort to keep your mind on what the speaker is saying. Fourth, try not to be diverted by appearance or delivery. Set aside the preconceived judgments based on a person's look or manner of speech. Fifth, suspend judgment until you have heard the speaker's entire message. Sixth, focus your listening by paying attention to main points, to evidence, and to the speaker's techniques. Finally, develop your note-taking skills. When done properly, note-taking is an excellent way to improve your concentration and to keep track of a speaker's ideas.